Today we're going to talk about farming and cooking in ancient Rome. In ancient Rome, we have the first cookbook, and it's by Apicius. So the first cookbook was written in the 4th century AD, and it has all these different recipes and tells us a lot about what the ancient Romans actually ate. And in ancient Rome, they really grew the same crops that they grew in ancient Greece. So grains are super important, and grapes, and also olives. The ancient Romans built on the same crops and diet that the ancient Greeks used, but the Roman Empire grew to encompass a huge area. Today, though, we're just going to talk about Rome itself, that region, where they would have had the Mediterranean climate with the mild winters, and they would have been able to grow all of the same crops that the ancient Greeks also grew. For the ancient Romans, pottage was a really important meal for them. Pottage is made out of grains, and it's a stew kind of soup that includes grains and vegetables and meat if they had it. And then they also ate bread at just about every meal. So grains were really, really important to the ancient Romans. And for pottage, the grains that they would have used would have been barley or wheat or millet or corn. The good thing about pottage is that you don't have to grind those wheat kernels into flour to make bread. You just put the kernels right into the stew and boil it. So it's a much faster and easier way to use your grains and get a meal. And most of the Romans ate pretty simply. They ate a lot of vegetables, and then when they could afford it, they would add fish or meat or bread or wine or olive oil to their meal. Grain was so important to Romans that the Roman government set prices for grain, which goes to show how organized their government was. And in hard times, they tried to make sure that every family had some grain. Let's take a look at the different protein that the Romans ate. They grew vegetable protein, so they grew lentils and chickpeas and other kinds of dry beans, just like the ancient Greeks. And that made up a big portion of the protein that they ate. But they also had a wide range of places where they found protein. So they ate eggs from lots of different kinds of birds. They had domesticated animals, which they ate, and then they also hunted. So they hunted wild boar, they hunted wild birds like even flamingos, and they even ate really small mammals like dormice, and they ate a lot of fish. So some of the other meats that the ancient Romans ate were beef and pork, and venison or deer, hare, rabbit, guinea fowl, pheasant, chicken, and geese. Peacocks, even. In fact, they used to have backyard barbecues where they would roast up a big wild boar. We even have some recipes from Apicius's cookbook about dormice. So here's a roasted dormouse recipe. Roast with honey, cumin, dates, wine, vinegar, and olive oil. And then here's a baked dormice recipe. Stuff the dormice with minced pork or the meat of other dormice chopped up with herbs, pepper, and pine nuts. Sew up the dormice and cook in a small oven. What about fruits and vegetables? Look at all the fruits and vegetables that ancient Romans ate. They had a wide range of nuts and veggies and greens and fruits. They ate apples and almonds and beans and cabbages and dates and figs and, of course, grapes and pears. And they also had salad. They ate vegetables and fruits and dried fruits in their salads, and they added some leeks and parsley. So lots of fresh fruits and veggies in the ancient Roman diet. What about dairy? The ancient Romans ate a lot of goat cheese, and they also made cheese out of sheep milk and possibly cow's milk too. They ate a kind of cheese they called moratum, and it was a goat's milk cheese that was mixed with herbs, olive oil, salt, and vinegar. And sometimes they added crushed nuts to it too. And for dessert, Romans actually did eat quite a bit of dessert. They had a second course to their meal, which was really just for desserts. But the desserts were only sweetened with honey or fruit. So honey cakes were a dessert that they continued from the Greeks. Here's a sweet recipe from the Apicius cookbook. Take the crust from a white loaf and break the bread into largish pieces. Soak them in milk, fry them in hot oil or fat, pour honey over them, and serve. Does that sound like a breakfast that you might recognize? That sounds a lot like French toast, right? So wealthy ancient Romans tended to eat kind of lying down on low couches that surrounded a low table. But plebeians, the lower class Romans, ate sitting up. They didn't get to have the long siesta that the wealthier class got to have. They had to work right through the whole day. And if they lived in the city, they might not have actually been able to cook in their house because cooking was over a fire. So if you lived maybe on the second story of a building, you might not have had a fire that you could cook on. And so they actually ate a lot of street food and had a lot of takeout, actually. The Romans ate most of their food with their fingers unless they were having soup with a spoon. And then they had knives to cut up their food, and their knives were made from antlers, wood, or bronze. So we can tell a lot about what the ancient Romans ate because they would throw the remains of their meal behind them as they ate. And so there are paintings of that, which you can see in this picture, and you can see little pieces of all of the different kinds of foods that they were eating. And also archaeologists can dig up those remains. So here's a recipe from Apicius for a pottage or a grain stew. And let's see how you like how it sounds. Soak hulled spelt, that's a kind of grain, and bring to a boil. When boiling, add oil. When it thickens, stir to a creamy consistency. Take 2 previously cooked brains and half a pound of meat. Mince as for rissoles. Pound the meat together with the brains and put into a saucepan. Then pound pepper, lovage, and fennel seed. Moisten with garum and a little wine, and put into the saucepan over the brains and meat. When this is cooked enough, mix it with the stock. Add this mixture gradually to the spelt, mixing it in by the ladleful, and stir until smooth, to the consistency of thick soup. And they talk about garum in that recipe, and garum is a fish sauce that the ancient Romans added to everything, even to some desserts. And it's made of dried fish, including the guts and the head and the tail. They didn't waste anything on this one. And they would dry it out in the sun and then grind it up with lots of salt. This, though, is not the kind of recipe that we're going to be doing. We're going to be making one of the first kinds of pasta and meatballs. And in ancient Rome, they didn't have tomatoes, of course, because those came from the Americas much later. And they didn't really make pasta, but they made a kind of dry dough that they would crack into water and could use as pasta. So we're making a version of a recipe that Apicius has in his cookbook, but his uses garum, and we're not going to use that. So our recipe is going to have grains, that's going to be our pasta, and then we're going to have protein, that's going to be our meat for our meatballs, and we're going to have some vegetables because we're going to add some spinach. All right, let's get started. This is a really fun one-pot pasta recipe, which is adapted from a great YouTube video by Historical Italian Cooking, and the link to that video is at the end of this recipe, so you can check it out. And a one-pot pasta means that all the ingredients go in one pot. So the sauce and the pasta go in one pot and cook together. The first thing that we're going to start with is making the meatballs. We're going to use today some ground turkey mixed with some ground pork. And the ancient Romans would have had domesticated animals that they could have used for making meatballs. And they also hunted wild animals like wild boar. But one thing that they didn't use in their pasta was tomatoes, because tomatoes weren't in ancient Rome yet, since they come from the New World. Another fun thing about this recipe is that the ancient Romans didn't really have pasta yet. How they made the very first almost pasta, they actually called it lagana, and that word became lasagna. And what they did is they just made a really simple flat bread that didn't have any yeast in it, so it was unleavened. And it was flour and water and salt, and they made a dough, and then they rolled it out with a rolling pin, and then they let it dry, and then they cracked pieces of it into their boiling water. And we're gonna have a similar kind of a thing because we're gonna use whole grain lasagna noodles, which we're gonna crack into our pot. And we're just gonna pretend that they are homemade early pasta. So first we're going to make the meatballs, and the very first thing I'm going to do is chop up some herbs. And you can use some dried herbs. I've got some Italian seasoning here, and I also love to use fresh herbs. Any kind of herb will pretty much work. Here today I've got some mint and I've got some parsley, but basil would also be really good. And I've also got some rosemary, some marjoram, some oregano, dried or fresh would be nice. So we need about a half a cup of fresh herbs. One really great and easy way to cut herbs that kids can do is cut them with scissors. So I'm going to take my parsley here and just give it a haircut with these scissors. I can cut the mint the same way too with the scissors. And then I'm going to chop up some rosemary. I have way more than half a cup, but that's okay because I really love herbs. I'm just going to put them in this bowl, and I'm going to save some parsley for garnish at the very end. So we're going to use about a pound of ground meat. So I'm going to put about a half pound of ground pork in here and half a pound of ground turkey. After you handle meat, you have to wash your hands. So I just touched that, taking it out of the container. So I'm going to go wash my hands and come back. So to the ground beef, we're going to add about a quarter cup of the herbs that we just chopped. And then we're going to add a tablespoon of olive oil, a little bit of black pepper, and a tablespoon of grape juice. So in ancient Rome, they would squeeze grapes and then boil them down to get a concentrated grape juice, and they used that to flavor some of their cooking. So this is going to give it a little bit of sweetness. Now we're going to stir it all up. Once you get it all stirred up, it's time to make the meatballs. So we're going to take our clean hands and we're going to get some meat and we're going to roll it into balls. After this, we'll wash our hands really well before we do anything else. You could make these out of ground beef or ground chicken, or you could even use Beyond Beef, a meat alternative. All right, let's get our water boiling. So we're going to put 4 cups of water into a big pot, and we're also going to boil some extra water so we have some extra hot water on hand in case we need it. To the pot of water, we're going to put in 2 tablespoons of olive oil, 2 bay leaves if you have them. The ancient Romans added garum, that salty fish sauce that they made, and this recipe has it in the meatballs and in the sauce and in the water, but it's really fishy. So instead of adding the fish sauce, which you can get in the store, you can get an Asian fish sauce, which is very much like it. And if you're really brave, you can try that. But instead of adding the fish sauce, let's add some regular salt. So we'll put half a teaspoon of regular salt in. And we're going to put this on to boil. While that's boiling, let's get our leek ready. The Romans used a lot of leeks, and leeks are in the onion family, so you could also just use an onion. They're pretty sandy inside, so what you do is you cut off the bottom, and then you cut it open, and that way you can wash the inside. They're really just like a big green onion or scallion. They're a little bit milder than onion, and we're going to use just the white part. So let's cut that into little rounds. I'm going to use a little bit of the light green part too. And then we're going to use 3 cloves of garlic. And you can use garlic powder instead of fresh garlic. Maybe half a teaspoon of garlic powder would be good for this recipe. The ancient Romans might have just used garlic medicinally rather than for cooking. Now we're going to add these to the boiling water. And we're going to add the meatballs right into the boiling water. I put the meatballs on medium-low and they're partially covered. And they're going to boil there for about 10 minutes while we make a sauce. For the sauce, we're going to use the other part of those herbs that we chopped up. We're going to use 3 tablespoons of grape juice. And we're going to put in some balsamic vinegar. We're going to add a tablespoon plus another teaspoon and more black pepper. All right, we're going to stir up our sauce. While the meatballs are boiling, we're going to break up our lasagna noodles. And they're whole grain, which is the kind of bread that they would be eating. So we're just going to break it into kind of little bite-sized chunks like this. Maybe an inch or two wide. And we're going to pretend that we're breaking that flatbread dough. You could also use another kind of whole grain pasta. Penne would work really well, or any kind of pasta would work actually for this. There's our pasta. Okay, our meatballs have cooked for 10 minutes, so now we're going to add our sauce. I'm going to turn the temperature back up. Stir that around a little gently so we don't break up the meatballs. When that comes back up to a boil, we're going to add the pasta. A one-pot pasta is pretty different than the regular way we make pasta because we add the pasta directly into the sauce with the meatballs and everything. We sprinkle these in, and we use very little water, just enough to cover the pasta because the pasta is going to soak up all of the water. So what we do is we press the pasta down into the water. And we have our extra hot water nearby too in case we decide we need some more. But we're going to let this hard lasagna pasta kind of melt down into the water and soften. I'm just going to kind of gently stir it to keep it all under the water. Turn it down a little bit. You can put the lid on about halfway a little bit too to help it kind of keep the steam in. And we're going to put the timer on for 10 minutes. I'm going to pull the cover off and check it, push them down and give them a little stir. So while this is cooking for these 10 minutes, we're going to just keep pushing the noodles down into the water and making sure there's enough water and giving them a little bit of a stir. It's been about 4 minutes and it looks like it's starting to really soak up the broth. Just going to keep pushing them down in and stirring them around a little gently. This is a good time to make a salad real fast. It's got 2 more minutes. Let's see how it looks. I'm going to add a little bit more water just to make sure my pasta is more covered. All right, 10 minutes have passed. Now we're going to put in some spinach. This cooks really quickly, so it will just steam right down. I decided to add some baby arugula too. I think it needed more greens. It's almost soaked up all the water. Now what we have to do is check and see if one of the pieces of pasta is done. It's going to be really hot, so we have to let it cool off a bit. Well, the water is almost gone. That pasta tastes like it needs maybe 1 more minute. I'm going to turn this down a bit because the water is almost gone. And put the cover on. Our pasta is almost ready. Look at that, the pasta absorbed all the water, and our ancient Roman spaghetti and meatballs is ready. And I added a little parsley for garnish, which you could try if you want. It tastes really delicious. I hope you get a chance to try it.